I don't have any tattoos, but like if I were to get a tattoo now, it would either be about my children or knitting. Like that's how much I feel like knitting feels like part of my identity.
When you start doing something and you know, like, I will be doing this for the rest of my life. Like, this is so satisfying to me and just feels such a part of me that I know I won't leave it behind.
Said I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm all about it. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm all about it. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Welcome to Two Women Yelling About Knitting, a show where we look up from our works in progress and acquisitions and talk about what we see in the wider world of knitting, its political, social, and historical context. But don't worry, it'll be fun. I'm Anjali, and I'm a knitter in Denver, Colorado.
I'm Allison, and I'm a knitter living outside Washington, D.C. We're friends who share a love of knitting, as well as an interest in a lot of sticky topics that relate to knitting. Things like traditional gender roles, consumerism, body liberation, and more. We're recording a 6-episode season with a new episode and a new topic every 2 weeks. If you want to join us on this journey, hit the subscribe button to follow along. Anjali, in the great tradition of Las Culturistas, which we will talk about later, what is the knitting culture that made you say knitting culture is for you?
Well, I think it was actually my introduction to knitting culture. We'll talk about later how we learned how to knit, and I learned how to knit through the Stitch and Bitch book by I can't remember her name. Deb something? She's one of the editors of Bust magazine, which was a magazine that I loved in the late 90s, early 2000s, because I was a riot girl in high school, a very staunch feminist, and but also kind of secretly a crafter. And what I really loved about crafts then and what I love about crafts now is sort of that DIY punk aspect of, corporate culture isn't making what speaks to me, so I'm going to make it myself. And so that was what that whole book was kind of about, like empowerment through creation. And so that really spoke to me. And also looking at knitting through a feminist lens of this space where women came together and had these Stitch and Bitch groups where it was like a safe space to craft and talk to your friends and express yourself in so many different ways. So that was the beginning of my knitting journey and really kind of defined how I see the craft and how I still relate to it in some ways. How about you,
That is
Allison?
super thoughtful. I feel like my answer is much on a much smaller scale, which is not bad necessarily. I learned to knit from my dad's sister, who was somebody I really looked up to in a lot of different ways. We were both like the left-handed people in our family and just had a lot of similar interests. And so she's the one who taught me how to knit. Every time I see her, we talk about knitting. And so it felt like just this kind of personal connection to a person, which then turned into a personal connection through gift giving. I will say my knitting has changed a lot in that I now mostly knit for myself, but especially in the beginning, it was very much about knitting for other people. There was something about the idea of making a gift for somebody else, like making something for somebody else, or spending my time in a way that like had a product at the end of it, of my own making that felt really special. I like the way you kind of crafted the way this conversation is going to go about the idea of chapters in a journey of knitting. And it has definitely changed over time, but I'd say that's where it started.
So you have told your story about how you started knitting, and I've kind of told my story to some extent. I guess I just picked up the book because I wanted to learn, and I knew how to crochet. My mom has always crocheted, and she taught me how when I was. And I think I was just ready for the next step in my like fiber arts journey and learning how to knit. And so I remember just buying some needles, Crystal Palace needles. Do those still exist? The bamboo needles? I think they were recommended in the book. And as we discussed, my Aztec turquoise brown sheep wool. And I was at my boyfriend's parents' house in Massachusetts and just reading the book and teaching myself. And I remember his mom was really confused as to why I was teaching myself how to do this out of a book, because she just was like, how are you doing that? I don't understand. And it was not, so we can set the stage of like, this was in maybe 2001, 2002. YouTube, if it existed, was very fledgling. There was no way to like go and watch a video to teach yourself how to knit. I didn't have anyone in my life that knew how to knit. And so just working through this book and like kind of unraveling this swatch over and over again, I figured out how to do it. So that was the beginning. And I just really, once I got the hang of it, just really loved it.
Yeah, this aunt taught me how to knit, just the basic knit stitch. I don't even remember. She must have taught me how to cast on. And it was the mid-90s because I was in high school. And I remember my grandmother lived in Maine, so we would meet up there, and she had taught me there. And I remember the whole car ride back to Washington, D.C., just like I couldn't stop, right? And I see this because I do teach knitting, and some people, it's like, oh, now I'm just going to do this exclusively for the next 48 hours. And I was like, I feel like I got kind of dizzy and like my hands hurt because I was just so focused on it. But I like finished this whole very lumpy scarf in that car ride. But my knitting very much like if you graphed it, it would be, what is this, sine, cosine? One of those guys that goes up and
sound
down.
Wave? I don't know.
Or right, it's
Yeah.
like it definitely like, that first moment of interest, and then it kind of cratered, and then it came back at different points in my life until it has kind of skyrocketed and I'd say leveled off, to really extend the graph metaphor. But so I only learned the knit stitch. That was all I could do until probably the late 2000s. So it was the same thing where I had this one person who she taught me the basics, but I didn't have any books, and I never learned from another person. But then once I did get back into it, the internet was my best friend. And I've now gotten into some classes, like I've been more interested in taking classes and things like that. But I would say everything I've learned has pretty much been on YouTube, which I tell people who I teach in a hospital as like knitting therapy. And it's like, I'm giving you the basics today, but I do encourage you, look at the internet. My favorite thing about the internet is knitting, 100%.
So
Anyway,
maybe
so
the internet is the knitting culture that made you say knitting culture
I
is
guess
for you.
so. I mean, right. So that's the thing. It's like this, my first introduction to it was this person, but then the internet has been my go-to since then, although it has felt very one-sided. Like I got a lot of information, but it was not like a relationship. I did not have a relationship with the internet when it came to knitting. So, the idea behind our episodes is we kind of want to pose a question and dig into that question. And we agree that when we listen to podcasts or watch podcasts, we're always like, wait, but who are these people? How do they know each other? Like just the real human basics behind it. So today's episode being less about the kind of cultural, sociological side of knitting and a little bit more about just who we are as knitters. We thought that it would be useful to talk about that. So Anjali, do you want to talk about who you are?
Just starting from where I am now, I am a public health registered dietitian. So I have my Master of Public Health that I got from Tulane. I lived in New Orleans for 7 years before moving here to Denver. And I'm originally from outside of LA. And originally went to school to become a filmmaker, but quickly decided that wasn't for me. I work in a nonprofit on, I guess you could call it a public health campaign, when people buy fruits and vegetables with SNAP benefits, which are also called food stamps. It's like a public program for low-income families and individuals, which is under attack. So that's wonderful. So basically, I'm working on a program that when folks use their SNAP benefits to purchase fruits and vegetables, they automatically get a reimbursement for those fruits and vegetables up to $60 a month. It's a USDA funded program. I went back to school as an adult to become a registered dietitian and get my master's degree. So I was in school for a very, very, very long time because shockingly, when you get a film degree, that doesn't transfer.
Because you had to do undergrad again, right?
I had
It wasn't
to
just like
basically
you,
do,
yeah.
a ton of just undergrad science classes and other classes. So that's kind of who I am professionally. I am also married, and I have 2 kids, and 2 boys, an 11-year-old and a 5.5-year-old. I'm half Thai. My parents met at a leprosy hospital where they were both working at in Thailand. My dad is Thai, and he was working with children of people that had leprosy, and my mom is white and American, and she had grown up in Thailand because her dad was a missionary, my maternal grandfather. And after college, she decided to move back to Thailand. So, yeah, I have never lived in Thailand, and we're actually going to Thailand. So my parents are divorced. I'm not sure if my dad is going to come. That's a longer story about like the Thai government and oppression. But I'm going with my mom's family. I think at the end of 2026, we're all going to take a big trip to Thailand for the first time as like a big extended family. I also had a Substack newsletter called Anti-Racist Dietitian, and I do still a lot of like speaking and sometimes some writing around those topics of like food systems, equity, and things like that. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to bring that back when my professional life is a little bit less hectic, because I really love writing, and that's probably like my first and number one love. So Allison, who are you?
It's funny. I feel like just the nature of my life is that I would define myself first as a mom, because that is a lot of what I do with my time. I also have 2 kids. One is 11, one is 9, 2 girls. But professionally, I am an actor, which I always hesitate to say if I'm not doing something in that moment. Watch episode 2 if you want to know about monetizing your hobby. But yeah, so I am an actor. I have a master's in fine arts, and I was a full-time professional actor for a while before I had kids. I was with a theater company called Nature Theater of Oklahoma, which was a very cool experimental theater troupe. I got paid to go to like a different country every week and do a show, mostly in Europe, a little bit in Asia. And then I wanted to have kids, and traveling the world 6 or so months a year felt difficult for me to do both. So took a little break from performing, have gotten back into it here and there. COVID didn't help. And I also, my day job, as most actors have, is education, one-on-one tutoring. I also taught for a couple years at a small liberal arts college. Would love to get back to that. And I am a site lead with a group here in DC called Project Knitwell, which will also feature in this Why Do We Knit episode. They are a nonprofit dedicated to teaching knitting as a stress relief coping tool to people in stressful situations. I lead a site at Georgetown University Hospital. We work with staff for knitting, but we also work with patients and caregivers in unit, and that has been a big part of my knitting journey. I know this question is later, but I feel like now that we've said who we are, we probably should get into this, which is like, how do we know each other?
Sure.
And how does knitting feature in our friendship? Do you want to say
sure.
it? Or because
So
I feel like I have a very specific story, but
about how we met, like our meet cute. Okay.
Yeah, we do. We have a friend meet cute, which is kind of great.
So
any of you out there watching who are, I don't know, older than like 21 years old know that making friends when you're an adult is like
horrible.
Bizarre and difficult.
Awkward.
Yeah, and awkward. So we both lived in New Orleans. That's where we met. How long ago?
So
10
our
years?
kids must have been,
Like
I think
not
Elliot
even
was
quite
like
2.
2. Yeah.
Yeah, just
So
about
it
2
must
years
have been
old.
like 2015 or something.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
And so our kids were going to the same school. which we didn't know it yet. But so there was this like pre-school starting, parent only event. And my husband and I walked into the event, the two incredibly introverted people we are, and we were immediately like, we have to leave. Like, we can't do this. And I think I said to him, I was like, we have to talk to somebody we don't know, and then we can go. And we like saw Angeli and her husband across the room, and we were like, those people, that's who we're talking to. And I'm pretty sure we just walked over and introduced ourselves. I don't know that we've ever... I'm curious how you remember this story.
Yeah. So what I remember is that we were at the event, and no shade to this school, but it was a different culture for us to get used to, because we were coming from LA. I think you guys were moving from
We were coming
New
from New
York.
York, and a lot of
And-
families at the school were like, had lived in New Orleans for generations and all seemed to already
Yes.
know each other.
Yes, I mean, a lot of people send
Yeah.
their children. It's a very generational school, so we're just not meeting our vibe of person. Like, very nice people, but just not our.
So
vibe.
you talked to more than one other set of people.
Yeah,
that
I
night?
think we were there for longer than you. We
Okay,
had been
yeah,
there
you
for a
were-
while,
Yeah.
and so we were about to leave,
Mm.
and then Campbell and Allison came up, and we started a conversation.
And then we all
just
left
totally get
collectively, and then
along.
we were all like, let's leave. Let's go do something,
Yeah,
just the
and then
four
we
of
went
us.
and got pizza.
Yeah.
So that's how it started. And then I remember, I feel like our friendship like took it to the next level. Unfortunately, when you were about to go, because I feel like we didn't really get super close until I came over when you were moving, and I helped you to clean out all of your closets. Basically, it was like your Marie Kondo.
Yes,
Like,
and I
does it
still
spark joy,
every time
Allison?
I'm trying to sort through things, I like remember you were so good at it. And I remember thinking like, what would Angeli do in this? Like, what would she say? What would she do? I still think about it a lot. That was a very good moment. So we ended up moving, but then you all visited us. So we moved to Pittsburgh, and then you all visited us, which was so lovely. Backing up, did knitting play a role in our early friendship? I don't remember that being the
All-
case.
I just remember being really impressed that you were knitting. Like, I had completely stopped after having a kid, and I remember,
Which is so
when
funny
I was at
because
your
I was the
house-
opposite. Like, having my kids is what inspired me to start knitting again.
Yeah, so I remember you had a doll that was like a doll
yes. Wow,
head
good
or
memory.
body, and then you had knit the whole dress underneath, and I was just so impressed. A, because I had never knit anything like that, and B, just that you still were knitting even while having kids and a whole life in New Orleans.
Yeah, and then so flash forward again. It was probably like earlier 2025. You had texted something about starting a knitting podcast, and I was like, ha ha ha, yeah, sure. And you were like, no, I'm serious. And so this has been such a lovely like reason to talk to each other. Just it's like, right, because we
Yeah.
are so busy, so much going on, and it's like, no, we have to make the time to like sit and talk about knitting and like think about knitting with each other for a while. I really don't have a lot of friends who knit, like, right, the Venn diagram of like people who were already your friends and people who were knitters and just like how that overlaps. I have very few of those, and you are definitely the prime one
Yeah.
for me.
Same. Yeah. And I find that as I get older and just there's more and more like pressure on my time and like things trying to take my time, I really enjoy having friendships where we have this like one special thing where, oh, I see this article about native plant people being psychotic. I'm going to send that to my friend Mara, and knitting was, I always knew that you were the one person who I remembered in my life who was like deeply attached to knitting. And so when I came back into it and it became so important to me, it was really nice to have you there to like share things with, because similarly, I don't have anyone in person that shares that with me.
Yeah.
And then when I started watching knitting podcasts and getting into like knitting YouTube, I just had this idea for having a knitting podcast that talked about things that were deeper than just acquisitions and works in progress. But I was like, I don't have time for that. Why am I brainstorming this other idea? And I just couldn't shake it. Like, I just kept thinking about it. So after maybe I would say like 4 to 6 months of it being like, it'd be so cool to do that, I finally officially pitched it to you, and we decided to move forward. So,
And I'm so glad you did.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let's now talk about that knitting journey. So early 2000s for you with Stitch and Bitch,
Mhm.
and then 2015, that knitting had kind of fallen off for you. What does your graph of knitting look like?
Yeah. So early 2000s, just knitting a lot of, I think I also started off like knitting a lot for friends. Also, I was living in LA, so how many scarves does one person in LA need?
I remember knitting in New Orleans at some point, like in the summer with the AC on. I was knitting a blanket and I was like, I cannot do this. It is
Yeah.
too hot.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and a lot of just small accessories, a lot of like fingerless gloves, and then moved to Japan. And Japanese knitting culture there's, a pretty good knitting culture there. I lived in Japan to teach English with the JET program. So I was living in a small city, basically like the Kansas of Japan. It's just in the middle. It's not, people living in cities are like, what? That's so Inaka, which is like countryside. But it was great. And I could ride my bike to the downtown area, and they had a little knitting store, and I would browse there probably like once every week or two. This was also kind of the Knitty era. I don't know if you remember that website, but that was like one of the first sort of online knitting magazines where you could get free patterns. I was like one of the first members of Ravelry because I had a blog, a couple blogs while I was there in Japan. And so connected with other people who crafted. So I remember what got like an early invitation to the site, but never.
Oh, I
know.
see. I didn't even know it was invite only at some point.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
exciting. It's like the early days of Facebook.
Yes. I don't think I ever posted anything that I made or anything like that. I didn't utilize it. I just utilized it for browsing other people's things and like very early sort of like connecting with people. And then moved back to LA. It's just, so everything was just kind of like very level. And then I basically had a kid and moved to New Orleans within the first 2 months. And everything just dropped off because I didn't feel like I had time or like mental space to do it. And as you've pointed out, like knitting in New Orleans in like 96-degree heat with like 90% humidity or whatever is just not, it was just not appealing to me in any way. And I have really sweaty hands. So it's like extra, like I don't want to do this. And I think I just sort of lost my mojo. All of my knitting things had gotten packed away when I moved, and I never really unpacked them. And I just didn't pick it up again until I was living here in Denver, and actual weather that includes snow and cold and wool sweaters are actually useful. I went to there was a local yarn store, went in and was just like, oh, yarn, I miss it so much. So picked up some yarn, and I had just wanted to practice like a headband. So basically like worked on a headband for one whole winter, and just it was terrible, and kind of got my gauge in check, and then moved on to a beanie. And knitting, it felt like had completely changed in the time that I had been away. It was
like
so
the world
different.
of knitting.
The world of knitting, the availability of patterns and the expectations. I remember it was a petite knit beanie pattern that called for holding 3 strands of yarn together, and I had to do a tubular cast on. And so I was just like, what is happening?
God bless you.
I don't understand, but was pretty much instantly hooked on the availability of tutorials and being able to teach myself these new skills and kind of make mistakes and figure it out with the help of the internet, and just really found the whole process soothing. Like you, I feel like it was kind of like this and then dropped down. But then since I came back in, it's just been up and up, because also as an adult, sort of the challenge of teaching yourself new things, or just kind of setting yourself gentle challenges that you can then work through, I find really satisfying, and just it's not something that you get to do a lot as an adult, like make mistakes and learn in a low stakes setting. And I feel like knitting has
I
provided
have
that to
a
me.
like I always have I don't know, an op-ed. I have an always have an op-ed and always have like a textile related dissertation floating in my head. And the op-ed I currently have floating around, which I is related to, being at the hospital, is like adults we should do things we're bad at. Right?
Yeah.
Like, how long are you bad at knitting? It's so interesting to me, right? Because I work with kids and adults, and the adults are constantly apologizing for not getting it right away.
Mm,
Whereas the kids are like, well, okay, whatever's happening is
yeah,
happening.
you're
But the
just
adults
expected.
can be so self-conscious or
Hmm.
so like apologetic about getting it wrong that is both part of the appeal of knitting. There's always something left to learn. Like the project I just did, I was like, oh, here's a technique I literally have never used before. There feel like there's always something to do that you are going to be new at or like possibly bad at. And you having that opportunity to challenge yourself, I think is part of the appeal, but
Hmm.
also objectively good for you.
Yeah. And I'm a perfectionist and always have been. It's something I've always struggled with. And so as a perfectionist, it's good to make mistakes and then be able to solve them, but not in a way that I don't know, like makes you feel bad about yourself. Like I made this mistake. And also just taking risk, knowing that if mistakes are made that you can fix it, and also who cares? There's always that calculus of I made this mistake. Is it
Yeah.
worth fixing? Is it worth
Right.
going back and fixing or not? Like, is it going to
Mhm.
drive me nuts, or should I just keep going? So
Mhm.
I sort of love that for myself as well.
In that category, I'm working on a very complicated cable knit sweater that I kind of didn't make up, but reverse engineered from a number of patterns. And I have realized that the way that the cables line up on the front and back are not the same. And I now am in the
Um,
place where I'm the fix the mistake person, and I am not fixing
mhm.
this mistake. I was like,
Yeah.
absolutely not. So it is kind of fun because I am pretty good at fixing mistakes now. And that's one where I'm like, nope, not going to
Yeah.
happen.
Well,
My
yeah.
knitting chapter book,
What are your
I like this,
chapters?
right? Graph chapter. So I learned it must have been 1996, 1997. I knit this scarf. It was all about it. I dabbled in college. Actually, that might have been grad school. I wasn't knitting that much. So that's my first dip. Then it picked up again when I was in this theater company because I was traveling a lot and had a lot of downtime and was like, oh, right. There's this thing that I do that is good for that. And so I started knitting a lot on planes and in dressing rooms. And I wish I'd been more into knitting because I dabbled a little bit in like international knitting culture, like going to yarn
Oh
stores
yeah.
in different countries, but not nearly the way I would now, which is
Hmm.
a little bit sad. Shed a tear for the missed opportunities.
They still exist. They're out
I
there.
know. I like Belgium. I went to some really beautiful ones. It was great. But anyway, so that was that. And then it was another dip when I had my first kid, I would say. I like made her a wool sweater to wear in New Orleans. Literally have one picture of her wearing it. I don't think she ever wore it again. Wonder if I must have it somewhere. Made that doll. So that doll was a gift from my to be born second daughter to my older daughter. And I do have like
Mm.
the sweetest picture of the older one meeting the younger one for the first time. She's holding the doll. My husband's holding her up. It's so cute. That doll fell victim to moths, but it's very patched up at this point, but it still is in the house. Um, that was a cool pattern. Yeah, more toys. I'm gonna knit some more toys.
Yeah.
But then I remember getting more into it when my second kid was born. My resurgence of knitting was very much tied to parenting in that I'm not a great baby person. Like I love my children, but I needed something to do for myself that felt internally satisfying that wasn't looking at my phone also. And so that's why I turned to knitting. I was like, this lets me engage in my adult brain but still be present with kids. I've mentioned this book before. It's called Women's Work, The First 20,000 Years. And there's this great kind of like in the anthropological research on like the division of labor between genders. Like, right, just biologically, if you are with children, what constitutes women's work, and a lot of fiber arts fall into this category. It's like monotonous enough that you don't fully have to pay attention most of the time. It's like productive, it's contributing to the family, it's not dangerous, and it's like it can be interrupted. And that's what knitting was for me. Like I knit this really complicated pair of mittens. I just remember so clearly, like with my second kid, just like bouncing her and just knitting and like talking to my older one. But it just felt like a way that I could be self-soothing and satisfying while not looking at my phone, but also like available to my children. So, maybe the graph is more like a big dip and then it comes back and it kind of like levels off for a while. We then moved to Pittsburgh. I had like my one bin of yarn. But then when we moved from Pittsburgh to DC in 2022, that was an extremely stressful move. I became a knitting machine. And also a knitting consumer in a way I hadn't been before. Like I was knitting so much and I was taking in knitting content. So there were 2 podcasts. There was the Make Good podcast. It was the summer of 2022. I listened to the entire catalog. And then also the Why I Knit podcast, which is Mia is her first name. She's a psychologist, psychotherapist in the UK, and she knit people about why they, or she knit people. She interviewed people about why they knit. And also Vogue Knitting had this really good series of interviews with like knitting people, a lot of designers. And I was just consuming all of this content. And I found out about Project Knitwell through the Why I Knit podcast, because they had come on to talk about their work in like knitting therapy. And it doesn't feel like an exaggeration to say that knitting got me through that move. And that was like where it really took off again. And I got super into knitting. I have too many bins of yarn now. I got into spinning. I got into yarn festivals. Like I don't have any tattoos, but like if I were to get a tattoo now, it would either be about my children or knitting. Like that's how much I feel like knitting feels like part of my identity.
Yeah, it's so I feel the same, like coming back to it, and just when you start doing something and like I will be doing this for the rest of my life. Like this is so satisfying to me and just feels such a part of me that I know I won't leave it behind. Yeah, I just want to talk about what you were saying about just being with kids and how knitting is perfect for that. And I feel like that also kind of touches on one thing on why knitting is so important to my day to day, is just that feeling of accomplishment that is not going to be wiped away at the end of the day, which I feel like when you're at home with little kids, like whatever you accomplish during that day is gone tomorrow. Like tomorrow is another day where you have to start from zero again. I feel that way about my job where I'm doing this pilot program. I can put hours, days, weeks into some part of the program that then could be wiped away because of some technology mismatch, or the USDA says we can't do that. And just this feeling of futility sometimes in how I spend my days. And knitting kind of brings me this satisfaction that my day job cannot, because no matter what, A, I get to dictate what happens with this piece of knitting, and B, like I see tangible proof of my time and the work that I put into the things that I knit.
I hadn't thought about it this way, but I wonder if that's part of why I have moved. I would say like 90% of what I make now is for myself. I wonder if that's part of it too, is that it is become this thing that is very much for the act of it is for myself.
Yeah.
And so having that final product that is the memory of that time and slow but incremental forward movement is like, I want to keep that.
Yeah.
And like, that is an investment in myself. What is your knitting life now?
On a daily basis, I usually have maybe 2 or 3 active works in progress. And I like to have something that's just plain stockinette that can be, or it doesn't have to be plain stockinette. Actually, I'm almost finished with this shawl that's it was easy to just pick up, like that interruptible concept you were talking about, where I don't have to pay close attention to the pattern, that I just can pick it up and know where I am and kind of go. And then maybe something that's more complex. And like you, I mostly knit for myself. I have done a few projects for family members, but for the most part, I knit for myself. And in my day job, I don't really have a lot of meetings where I can just sit and knit, just because a lot
That's
of
the
times
dream. That's
I
what we need. We
know.
need jobs. That's right. It's not about monetizing the hobby. It's about getting more time to knit for yourself.
Yeah.
Those people who
But
like
I'm
talk
always
about like,
either like
yeah.
taking notes or
Mm.
facilitating the meeting, so I can't, and I'm not like eyes off the knitting knitter enough to
Mm.
just sit there and like facilitate the
Under the
meeting.
table. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so a lot of my knitting happens after work. And if my husband's cooking, I'll usually watch a knitting podcast and just knit while he's cooking dinner. And either way, usually after dinner, there'll be some sort of knitting involved while watching TV or whatever.
Hmm.
And I will also often, if I'm a passenger in the car or if I'm traveling, for sure, knitting the whole time. So that's kind of my day-to-day knitting life. How about you,
Yeah.
Allison?
Yeah. I knit every day. I this is very much, I think, in keeping with our personalities. Like, I'm not surprised that you don't have 12 works in progress at a time. And you may not be surprised to find that I do. I also like the variety of like, this is the complicated one, this is the straightforward one. Also, size. So I am the primary caregiver in my house, and I am constantly knitting out in the world. Like, I will knit in a carpool line. I will knit sitting, waiting for my kid to finish her sewing class, like for a minute and a half. Like, I will pick up my knitting anywhere I can. So I like to have something portable. I like to have different size needles. I think that helps me manage just the amount of knitting that I want to do. Holding different size needles and helps my hands. Definitely knit while watching, like my family likes to watch historical reenactment TV show at the end of the day, or maybe a movie, and I will knit then. I knit before bed. So I am still a reader, but only audiobooks because my time is
Mm.
precious. And now I really have to decide. Like, the last thing I do is I will listen to my audiobook and knit. I actually have a little neck light thing so that the lights can, if my husband wants to go to sleep, I have the little like focus lights that I can keep working. Yeah, so that's what knitting looks like for me.
Do you feel grouchy if you don't knit in a day,
Yeah,
or
I
does
mean,
that
I
never
honestly can't
happen?
remember the last time I haven't.
What is your relationship to your yarn stash?
So this comes from our notes in which I wrote my thought that we could talk about was, does knitting ever let us down? There is this great Instagram person, Louise. What is their, don't remember their handle. We'll remember it and like pause, put it in. They had a great video about doing knitting to get out of the capitalist, rat race. And then it turned into the capitalist rat race. I haven't finished my project. I'm so mad at myself. And I very much connected with that post. I'm not a neat person. I'm a cluttered person. My yarn stash is out of control, despite the fact that I don't buy yarn anymore. And I will say, interestingly, my kids are like a little bit anti-knitting. It still is an attention
Mhm.
suck. And my kids do see that. And today something happened where, can't remember the context, but one of my kids was like, well, and you were looking at your phone. I was like, no, I wasn't. I was knitting. And she said, same difference.
How dare she?
Oh, this is something that interests
Uh,
me. Also, just in that chain of learning to knit, I feel like when you hear stories, my aunt or my mother taught me to crochet, but then the knitting thing was from a separate place or whatever it is. And I wonder if it or my grandmother, if it skips a generation. I mean, it's also just that thing where it's like,
it's
whatever
hard to
my
teach
parent,
your kids something.
anything. And also what my parents do isn't cool. Like, I got this
Yeah.
shirt the other day and my daughter was like, and we're kind of almost the same size now. And she was like, I'm never going to wear it. It is a cool shirt objectively, and I'm never going to wear it because you think it's cool.
Oh.
As someone with only 2 to 3 whips at a time, Anjali, what is your yarn stash like?
So I actually did the thing where, so I had been accumulating yarn for that whole time from when I started knitting, basically until I moved to Denver. So yeah, 20 years. I obliterated my yarn stash. And after I moved to Denver, I was like, I don't think I'm going to knit again. I've been carrying around this stash of yarn that I've been building up. And definitely my approach to buying yarn before that was just like, oh, this looks cool. It's on sale. I don't know. Let's just get it. I didn't, as we talked about like in our yarn episode, didn't know anything about weight really, like didn't pay attention to those things. I did keep all of my needles, but basically just gave away all of my yarn, and had like whips that were almost done, just threw them away. I don't know. Is that terrible? Like I was
No,
just
I
like,
feel
I'm
like
not
that's
going to
actually
finish this.
liberating. Yeah.
This is like a psychological drag on me, and I've been carrying it around for
Maybe it's
so
what
long.
let you get back into it. 'Cause you were
Maybe.
starting
I mean, maybe so,
fresh.
because I didn't feel obligated to these old things that were like from a previous me who didn't know what she was doing, and was kind of just buying things based on like, I don't know, it's cheap and I think it looks okay. So yeah, so I just obliterated it, and maybe like a year or two before I started getting into it again. So going in, I feel like I had much more intentionality. And I think also listening to that Make Good podcast where they talked about the process versus the project knitter. And so in my mind, I was like, I want to be more of a project knitter. I want to like buy yarn based on things that I know I want to make. And maybe it is also the middle age, like feeling my own mortality of like, I don't have the rest of my life to knit and time is limited. So how do I want to use that time? So, so I do have a stash because there's still so many great patterns out there. That's the dark side, other dark flip side of the internet is I feel like when we started, it was like so hard to find a sweater pattern that would be easy enough, like looked the style that you wanted to look, and
had a video that
was
helped you
accessible.
through the tricky part.
Yeah. But now, obviously, there's way too much to choose from. So I do still have a pretty large bin in my closet of yarn, but it is pretty much all earmarked in some way for something that I want to make.
This was not on our list of questions, but I want to ask it. We can always cut it. But how do you track your work? Are you like a Ravelry queue project? Like where do you track your progress or your plans or whatever it is? And how do you do that if you do?
So I'm sort of obsessed with Japanese stationery.
Great.
And yeah, just that whole Japanese stationery life. So I got this special kind of notebook portfolio thing that you can like get different sorts of like pockets to put into. So and then this is like, I'm so nerding out on this Japanese stationery. I have like these pens that I love and this like paper brand where it's just a very delightful experience. And I think we haven't talked about this yet, but part of what makes knitting so special is that tactile experience when so much of what we do is online, on phones, not involving our other senses. I was like, I don't really like using Ravelry. I have not used it consistently because I don't really like the experience of like logging on, like putting how many grams of yarn or whatever. So I was like, I feel like I'm going to try, and I don't really like the knitting journals that I've seen. I feel like they're too have reference things that maybe I'm not going to use, or it just feels too rigid. And I was like, I want to try having my own. So I've been taking notes on projects when I finish them because I do like having the notes about gauge and any modifications that I made. And then it has like a pocket so I can also put in like the label for the yarn that I used. And I am keeping my swatches because I think that is useful. If I like a yarn, like I want to use that yarn again. That has been a good way to keep track of things in a way that kind of is satisfying and not feeling obligatory and like a drag on my time.
I do that thing. I'm currently picked up a project that I started a while ago that I took no notes on because I was like, right in the moment, it's like, oh, I love this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to remember everything. And now I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I write more down?
Yeah.
And I do default to Ravelry. So I use the Ravit app, which has not all the capabilities of Ravelry, but enough for me. And it's just the easiest place for me to write down stuff. But as a multiple whip person, that is useful to me just because I put things down and then I pick them up and don't remember where I am or what's happening.
Well, this is kind of a good segue to cast on or drop that stitch. And we're going to take turns with it, but for today, it's going to be Allison's turn, where I am going to throw out a list of knitting, I don't know, concepts or preferences, and Allison will tell me if that's a cast on for her, like something that she likes, or if it's a drop that stitch, if it's something that
Yes.
she does not like. And this is all obviously very like your personal choice. No judgment on anyone that disagrees with you.
And this is truly improvised. I have no idea what she's going to say.
Yes, it's all okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Knitting garments for children.
Cast on.
Okay. Fancy stitch markers.
Drop that stitch. I'm just going to lose them.
Yeah. Sport weight yarn.
Cast on. Yeah.
Okay. It's just a random yarn weight. I don't know.
It is. And I feel like I don't have a lot of it. I think, because, for example, a garment, I think fingering weight garment is something sort of that I would like to do and also intimidating. And somehow if it was sport, like DK I've done plenty of, and sport might be like a gateway because it's like, oh, that'll be a little bit faster. So yeah, cast it on.
Okay, great. Picking up stitches.
Yeah, cast on.
Okay, I hate it.
Well, it depends on the type of garment, or it depends on the type of project that you're picking up the stitches for. I will say that is something we could talk about another time, but that is a skill that I feel like I really fudged for a long time, and I'm in the last maybe 9 months have like come to understand it in a new way. So I do like it now, but it has not always been that way. We'll put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I admire you. Okay. Holding with a strand of mohair.
That is a cast on. I feel like it's a little bit trendy, so the rebel in me wants to be like, absolutely not. But I've done it. The result was really nice. It makes things go more quickly. I don't know if I always want it to be mohair, though. I currently have a sweater's quantity of a fingering weight and a Surrey alpaca that I'm really looking forward to trying out. And I do like the way that it like can kind of play with the color if you have two things that are like close but not totally matching. So yeah, do it.
All right. Knitting a gauge swatch.
Yeah, cast on. You don't have a choice. Well, okay, no, it depends. I always do it for a garment. I will not always do it for literally anything else. But if it's a garment, absolutely.
Seamed sweaters.
Yeah, cast on. Sorry, I'm too enthusiastic.
No.
I don't do a lot of them, but I have done them. I will say I have also done the Elizabeth Zimmerman faux seam. Do you know about this? It's really fun. You like knit, and it's stockinette. If you do a stockinette thing, you then find the seams on the side and you drop down the entire way from the underarm down to the hem, and then you pick up, but only every other row, and it kind of just gives it a little like a little tautness that a seam would also do. So I've done that too. But I see the benefit in a seamed garment.
All right, last one, the Sophie scarf.
I have knit one. Cast on. I have knit one. It was not as easy as it should have been. Like I struggled to count the increases. Like I was supposed to be mindless, and it wasn't. But it was a great gift. It went super quick. What I love about it is also that it's reversible. There's so many of those like beautiful cabled or like lace, similar kind of scarves out there. And then you like tie it and the other side shows and you're like, oh, that doesn't look good. Like the Sophie scarf being garter stitch, it like lies nicely. So so Sophie scarf, do it. Great beginner, learn some skills and make someone feel special with minimal effort. for gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
We
A
did
plus. Clapping. Love this segment. It's coming back every time. Angeli, tell me what has brought you joy this week in your knitting, or this 2 weeks?
So the thing bringing me joy is my sister had a baby. My youngest sister had her second baby, a little girl, only the second girl in the family. And so I'm making her a tiny cardigan. It's the Aosta cardigan from Knit Pearl Girl, Andalusian stitch. So it's mostly just knitting, and then, I mean, you have to purl the other side, but then it's one row of like a 1x1 rib, basically. It's simple. It's easy to sort of pick up. I don't have to like know which row I'm on. It's easy to figure out, because it's just a 4-row repeat. And then I'm using double Sunday. I know a couple episodes ago, I was saying I didn't like working with Sunday, but it's actually nice. The color is blackberry juice, which is perfect because they live in Seattle, which has a lot of wild blackberries. And I feel like it's not like a maybe traditional little girl color.
And is it superwash?
Oh, superwash. It's not. So I am going to give them a little bottle of wool soak.
What? How thoughtful. I'm already was like, oh, that would be a really good cast on, drop that stitch, knitting child garments in not superwash. But that
I know,
is,
so it is a little aggressive, and hopefully they'll still appreciate it. Just because I feel like, I don't know, I've done child knits in superwash, and they just don't, I feel like they're just kind of like, I'm just, don't do a, I'm going to tell you it's a drop that stitch for me for superwash, because I feel like it's so heavy and saggy, and I just don't enjoy working with it. And also, like, even if I gave someone a superwash thing, I don't think that they should just throw it in the washing machine. I don't know if
not all superwash is created equal, I think.
Yeah. And I'm just going to give instructions, because I feel like, especially now that I like the no rinse kind of wool soak, it's pretty easy.
It's magic.
What's
lovely.
making you happy this week, Allison?
I really was on a garment kick for like a long time, and I recently finished a pair of socks for a friend who has a lot of life changes right now, and I had enough left over. I was like, I'm going to make some socks for me. And I forgot the satisfaction of an accessory. Same thing with the Bitty Brioche kerchief. My friend saw mine, requested one. It took me like 5 days. So I feel like I'm having an accessories moment. I had kind of let my accessory knitting dip, and I feel like that's going to make a comeback, and always have an accessory. Like socks. Can't go wrong. Can't go wrong with socks.
You really can't.
So yeah. So that's been really nice.
How about outside of knitting? What's making you happy?
So the question we posed at the beginning of this podcast was, what is the knitting culture that made you say knitting culture is for you? Which is a direct quotation of a podcast called Las Culturistas. I'm not really a podcast person, but I got into this one. It's Bowen Yang and Matt Rogers, and I listen to it all the time. It like makes my week. It is the podcast I save for when I have to do something I don't want to do, mostly house stuff around my house. And I'm like, but you can listen to Las Culturistas if you do it. So I love it so much. Makes me really happy.
Yeah. Thanks for introducing it to me.
Did you have oh yeah, and Angeli has started listening to it too.
Yes.
And sees the benefits. Anything come to mind for you? Anything at all?
So I have started watching all of Parks and Rec with my 11-year-old son. I love that show, and it's not available on stream. We don't have Peacock, so it's not available on streaming. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to buy it. Like, I'm just going to pay for all the seasons. And it was a bit of a slog to get through the early ones until they figured out kind of their tone. But now that they have, it's just so satisfying. Like, that show just does such a good job of having these characters with just the perfect workplace comedy with like this motley crew of characters who you come to love for all their strange and unusual and charming quirks, and it's very like wholesome and fun to watch with him. It is very like fat phobic in a way that I don't remember. There's a lot of stuff about Pawnee, like fourth most obese city in the nation. I don't know if you remember that. And like
I literally don't think I've ever seen an episode.
Allison.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just skip to season 3 if you
Okay.
you ever decide to do it. Yeah, it's great. I've also realized like coming back to it, because I haven't watched it since before I had a kid. So, it was like before I finished my schooling and got into a real career. But I've realized like, I'm kind of like at work, I'm kind of a Leslie Knope, for better or for worse.
That's okay.
Yeah, just very enthusiastic and full of ideas. So
I think it's for better in the end.
Thanks.
Yeah. Always.
Thank you. So this episode was different from our usual. We'll be
Yeah.
back to answering the tough questions next episode. And if you're enjoying, then please subscribe. Drop in the comments, where did your knitting journey begin? What are the chapters of your knitting life?
What does knitting for you on a daily basis look like?
Yeah, or anything else that resonated with you that we talked about. But thanks for being here.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Said I'm all about